Hello and welcome back to part 3 of our character modeling tutorial where we're going to be covering the body blockout. So for the body blockout, we're going to start by creating a cube and scaling that down to fit to about the size of the top of our torso. I'm going to go ahead and add in a subdivision surface modifier with a level of 4 so that we have enough geometry to work with, but not too much because this is not going to be quite as detailed as the head. So I'm just going to go into my side view and my front view, start to position this and scale it so that it generally fits in with our reference. Once I have it looking about in the right position, I'm going to enter sculpt mode, turn on mirroring across the x-axis, and I'm just going to start pulling our sphere into place to match up with our reference. Starting with the top part of the chest, we're going to get to the lower part of the torso later on. Alright, and once we have the top of the torso blocked out how we like, I'm just going to go in with the clay strips brush and start to block out pec muscles. That looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to go in with the inflate brush and start to create the shoulder muscles. And I'm feeling like we don't quite have enough geometry to work with right now, so I'm going to go back into object mode and subdivide our mesh a few times. Back into sculpt mode and just kind of readjust where the additional mesh made some details that we don't quite need. Now I'm just going to go in and start to define more the top of the pec muscles and start to draw in our clavicle. So for that, I'm going to go in with the draw sharp brush and just create clavicle character. And you want to make sure that the clavicle isn't just a straight line. There should be a little bit of a curve to it, curve upward here at the top of the pec. That looks pretty. I'm going to turn on our front view back on and just make sure that everything is lining up here where we need it to. As we can see here, this doesn't go all the way to the edge of where his muscles are, but that's no problem because we can always go in with the grab brush and kind of readjust things, pull things out as we go, and we can certainly do that once we have a little bit more of the detail in. We don't need to fit this to the body perfectly just yet. Now I'm just going to go back into the front view and make sure that our shoulders are matching up. Gonna use the flatten brush to create a defined line right here for where the rib cage is. Just go back to the grab brush to move this back into place. That's looking good. Now I'm going to create a mask on the bottom part of the chest right here, just so that we can pull it out and downward to create the lower part of the torso. Just going to go ahead and invert that with Control I. I'm going to switch to the moving tool and just bring down that part of the torso. That looks like, I'm going to remove our mask with Alt M. Switch back to the grab brush to just get things into place. Smoothing. Just going to do some quick shaping for that. Don't seem to have enough cheese, so I'm going to turn on. Alright, now I'm going to go in and define a little bit more of the muscles right here on the side towards the back and around where our armpit and shoulder are. Alright, now that we have our torso sculpted out, I'm going to go in and start adding arms. I'm going to start by adding a cube to the scene, down, bringing it up and positioning it about around where the arm will be. A little more. We're going to go in and add in a subdivision surface modifier. I will give us 5 divisions to work with. Apply. Now we're just going to go sculpt mode. And because we're working with something that is only, like we're working on it for it to be just on this side of the body, we don't have to add on any mirroring modifiers. So I'm just going to go ahead and start pulling this, creating the shape of our arm. It's best to work in all the different views you have available to you, so switching between front view, side view, and perspective view can be very helpful in creating shapes. Okay, now that we have our general shape of the upper arm, we can go and start to sculpt in some of the muscle definition. Great, now that we have the top of our arm shaped, we can go and mirror this over to the other side. Go into object mode, work, select our object, add the mirror modifier, eyedropper tool to select our mirroring surface. We can now go ahead and start to work on the forearms. So I'm going to start again, same process, adding in a cube, scaling this down, positioning it about to the location of where the forearm will be. And same as usual, subdivision surface, turn it up to 5 divisions, slightly. And as you can see, this part where the top part of the arm and the lower part of the arm connect, it's a little bit more narrow. And then at the back of the arm is where the elbow is really defined, and you can tell where the two pieces of the arm connect. So I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm working on the second part of the arm and how to connect the two of these together. I'm going to go into sculpt mode and just start shaping the bottom part of our arm. Now that we have our arms done, I'm going to go in and start on the lower part of the body, like the legs and the lower torso. So to begin, I'm just going to go into front view and bring down this part of the torso into a point here so that it's ready for when our legs are attached. It's going to go into sculpt mode, turn up radius, actually going to go into grab brush, turn up the radius so that we can just pull this down, so fitting it to our reference. See, it pulled a little bit of the detail on our ab muscles here, but that's not a huge deal. Let's go in and redefine those. Great. Now that we have our torso ready for the legs, I'm going to go back into object mode and I'm going to add in a cube just like we did for the arms to create our thighs. Just going to position that roughly where the thighs will be located to the and add in our subdivision surface. Turn that up to 5 divisions. Just start to pull this into place to fit our reference. Okay, now that we have our torso and our upper thigh, we can go ahead and start to create the lower leg. And Once we're happy with both of our upper and lower leg, we can go ahead and start to add the muscle definition. For that, I'm going to use the Draw Sharp tool. When comparing it to our reference, I'm noticing that the hip is a little bit too much going in towards the torso. So I want to just bring the torso out a bit and define this side muscle right here. Something else that I'm feeling is that the thighs are a little bit too straight and they don't come out on the sides enough or on at the center enough. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull those out a bit with the grab brush. Okay, now that we have our torso, arms, and legs done, it's time to move to the hands and feet. For the hands, I'm going to start by repeating the same process that we did for the rest of the body parts. I'm going to create a cube and position it where the hand should go. I'm going to use the flatten brush to create a place for the fingers. And just readjust with the grab brush. Okay, great. Now we can go ahead and add the fingers. I'm going to start by adding a cube. That looks pretty good. Now we can just duplicate this into our other fingers. I'm just going to go ahead and move the pivot point up to where the fingers enter the hand so that if we need to rotate the fingers, that will be easier to do. I'm just going to click D and drag pivot points. Okay, now that we have the fingers, I'm going to go ahead and add the thumb, adding a new cube, scaling it down, and positioning it where the thumb should go. Looking pretty good. And if there's any issues with the scaling or the size, we can always go back in and readjust that later on. So it's not too much of a concern. Just gonna go back into the palm of the hand and just kind of readjust so that it fits in a little bit better with our reference and connects a little bit better into the wrist. For the foot, I'm going to start by repeating the same process, adding in a cube, scaling it down, and positioning it at the ankle. Adding in a subdivision surface modifier. And I'm just going to start to sculpt this into the shape to fit our reference. And that about wraps it up for our rough body blockout. In the next part of the tutorial, we're going to be going over creating our clothing and accessories for our character.